I've found that by focusing on myself as the sole proprietor of content, it's forced me to really, really double down on amazing content. It has to be. It has to be. If I was relying on guests, it's easy to sit back, ask a nice question, and call it a day. But because I don't do guests, it's forced me to create really, really great content, and it's worked.
This Audience Summit is brought to you in partnership with Podcast Notes, the best ideas from the world's best podcasts in minutes.
Welcome to the Grow Your Podcast Audience Summit, brought to you by the Lewis and Kyle Show. We're super excited to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. It's great to meet you. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time as well. Real quick, for those who aren't aware of yourself and your show, could you introduce yourself, the podcast, the when and why you started it, and what the mission is?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, Case Kenny, I'm in Chicago. I host a podcast called New Mindset Who Dis. It's a self-development podcast focused on mindfulness and meditation. I do it twice a week. Started it about 2 years ago. I've been really humbled by its success. It's number 18 on the health and wellness charts right now, which is pretty great. I've been doing it for quite some time, and I've created an entire business around it as well, an e-commerce business, which has exceeded my expectations. But yeah, I started it as a challenge to myself, to really push myself to focus on my own self-awareness and mindfulness. And I just found that talking through those topics myself really accomplished that. And then people started saying it was really helpful for them. And it kind of just has taken off since then. So it's been a pretty wild ride in a short amount of time.
Well, that's awesome. That's a perfect backdrop for a contributor for a summit about growing an audience. So with that intro behind us, I'll ask you the first question. What's been the most effective marketing channel for growing your audience, and how have you used it?
Yeah, I'd say it's a combination of classic channels, Instagram and email. Both serve a purpose. So Instagram, for me, if you look at the show, my call to action is always follow me on Instagram or DM me on Instagram. And then from there, that's always been effective for me because it puts a face to the podcast. It's easy for a podcast just to be a voice, right? But you really, to create a loyal audience, you really need people to know who you are, what you represent, especially in the self-help space, which is the space of the name that's been given to the space that I'm in. It's like self-help is full of just la-di-da, and gurus and things like that. It's really helpful to put a name to it and a face to it. So for me, it's follow me on Instagram. And there it's just like, oh, wow, he's just a dude. And then it's much more relatable. And then I've also found, growth tactics within Instagram, particularly with like the quotes that I do on Instagram, that has really enabled me to 10x my following quickly. And then those people listen to the podcast and it becomes this nice circular thing. So Instagram as a channel specifically for creating that familial effect, and then email for traffic, pure traffic. I mean, I have a large email list. It's a little over 230,000 people. I've been writing since 2014. I've been collecting emails since 2014, and I use my email newsletter, New Mindset Who Dis, to basically recap the episodes and then to push people to listen to the episodes. So I don't do sponsors. I don't do anything like that. It's all focused on listen to the podcast, subscribe to the podcast, share the podcast, rate and review the podcast. So Instagram to create that brand effect, email to create that traffic, and it served me really well.
That's incredible. Yeah. And I know that you started sort of in email with your previous company, Pursuit. So being able to leverage that and move that that list forward into this new venture that you're in, I'm sure was very valuable. But the next question that we're going to ask you and all of the participants in our summit is, what are some underrated tactics that you've used to attract listeners to your show?
Yeah. I've got a lot of thoughts on this, but to keep it simple, I think I have a couple, but I think the biggest one for me is that I don't do, this is going to sound weird and this might not even sound like a tactic, but I don't do guests on my show. I've had 2 on there over time, and that's just because I kind of wanted to do it. But otherwise, I've done 241 episodes without any guests. And I think that's served me really, really well, because I have found that some shows that struggle to grow are very reliant on their guests for that growth. And that's the whole idea of guests, right? You get a guest to come on, he or she drops value, he or she then shares that episode with their audience, and then you just continue to grow. But it obviously, as you know, it doesn't always work out that way. And I've found that by focusing on myself as the sole proprietor of content, it's forced me to really, really double down on amazing content. It has to be. It has to be. If I was relying on guests, it's easy to sit back, ask a nice question, and call it a day. But because I don't do guests, it's forced me to create really, really great content, and it's worked. Like people find the content to be really emotionally driven, and they share it a lot, and it's very shareable, and it's worked really well. So not so much a tactic, but just something subtle that I've noticed. I never set out to like not do guests, but it turned into this thing where I'm very reliant on myself, and I don't need guests. So that's tactic one. Tactic two is kind of guests, in that one of the things I do is I do music collaborations with DJs and producers on there. I only do it every 6 or so episodes, but that's really, really helped me open up a new demographic, particularly on Spotify, right? Where people are already listening to music. And then I do these mindfulness meditations set to dance music, and people come over and listen. And it's a very fluid progression for them, right? It's not a podcast, but it's not music. It's like a DJ set with audio. Like pretty interesting stuff. So that's served me well, and that's obviously not for everyone. But I'd say that the takeaway from that is like there's people within your community, a niche that you could team up with and collaborate with, even if it is a guest. I think that could serve you well, or some kind of collaboration. It's really worked well for me. So I'd say between those two things, one more being just something subtle I've noticed, and the other being kind of like a collaboration tactic.
Well, thank you for sharing those. I think there's a lot of value and a lot of truth there. One thing we've kind of explored through a couple of these interviews is hosts like to have certain repeatable things that people come to expect from them. But if you're the interviewer, that really only makes up maybe 10% of the conversation. Is like, I like that they're going to ask this question this way. Whereas with you, the host, your personality is going to be, maybe 60, 70, 80% consistent. And so it's like really that predictability factor that I think attracts a lot of people and makes them feel like they get to know you better, because all they're coming to expect is to hear from you, and there's not as many surprises. Which I think can be a really good point. A good thing.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Absolutely.
So third question, and I know you covered this a little bit, kind of in the last answer, so we'll see if you can take a slightly different angle to it. But how have you converted listeners into fans? So kind of established in the first couple of questions, you've been able to hit a pretty large reach. So in what ways have you turned the people who have found you into really kind of passionate fans?
Yeah, a couple of things, definitely. I think for one, the nature of my delivery of content. I mean, I have a leg up in that it's self-development. So it's inherently very personal to people. It's inherently very emotional to people. I think it'd be different if I was talking politics or something that you can kind of separate yourself from. But I think I create content that creates an emotional trigger. Like that's my whole goal. I want to create an emotional reaction from people, either with the music collaborations or with my own thoughts. And that has done the trick, man. It's like the ability to create something personal and effective for someone has done wonders. Particularly, so I talk a lot about relationships and dating, and everyone goes through relationship and dating issues, and people want answers. People have questions. People have issues. And just the way that I found my ability to address that with personal stories for myself, and then, simplified, no BS advice towards it, it's really created these people that are like, wow, like, this is really helpful. So that's like an intrinsic value of the content. Outside of that, one of the things I've always done that served me really well is I respond to everyone. Now I'm a little bit bigger and it's a little difficult to do it, but any DM you send me, any text you send me, I was one of the first podcasters on the community platform. I was in their closed alpha when they were recruiting podcasters. So I've been giving out my phone number for almost a year now, and I'll respond to as many people as I can on my phone, and creating that value exchange where people can reach out. There's so many podcasters that are big, or artists even that are big, that don't respond to anything. But I make my mission to respond. Even on Instagram, I will respond to every single comment, even if there's 500 on a photo. So I think that's how I've turned people into fans. And then the very bottom of that funnel is I have journals and books that I sell, and people will buy that. And that just completes the circle for them. They can listen to me, they can see me on Instagram, they can receive my email recaps, and then they can buy a product that brings it all together, and they can literally physically experience what I have to offer. And it's worked really, really well.
Yeah, I think just even in my limited experience, just being a listener of your show, not for too long now, I think that's totally true, because immediately you challenge people to frame everything in the context of themselves and their ego, not necessarily in a problematic way. Just think, are you chasing someone? Like, is that in terms of relationships? Immediately I listen to that episode and my mind turns inward, and I give you credit for leading me to take those kinds of thoughts. And over the course of hundreds of episodes and hundreds of related ideas, I'm just going to have a million associated things that Case and his show are the reason I'm thinking about these things. And if there's a productive outcome, I'm going to be indebted or grateful to you for setting me on that path. And I think that's true for hundreds of thousands of people. And that's just extremely powerful.
Yeah. No, I'm super humbled to be in that position. I mean, it's true. That's a really good point. I mean, I have this ability just based on the vertical of content I do. And then, I have a knack for it. It is what it is. And yeah, you create this emotional connection with people. Like, I think just the way that I frame the content, I feel like a lot of self-help content is very preachy. It's 5 steps to do this. Me, I'm like, hey, I'm just the dude. Here's what I've realized. Here's an example of where I messed up. And here's what you could take away with it. People are like, wow, like maybe he's just a guy who's right there with us, but he's got a really good point. I'm going to try it out. And then it's helpful. And then, I do 2 episodes a week so they can check back in, and I answer text and I'll answer emails, and it just creates this, I'm not some like untouchable podcaster by any means. Like, I get stopped in Chicago all the time by people who recognize me, and I love to chat with them. And I have a big Chicago following because here's where I started it. But yeah, I mean, everyone says that. It says the content is relatable. It's relatable. All the reviews say the same thing. It's relatable. Yeah. So I appreciate that. Yeah. It's a big part of what I strive to be and to do.
Yeah. And I think another interesting thing is like how, most of the time when you're engaging with content, or at least for me, a lot of the time, I will go into it thinking about how consuming it and implementing it in my life will affect me in the future, and how it'll create some sort of positive gain for me. And I feel like your podcast really, you enter into it. Maybe you do have that mindset or that thought process, and then it just immediately makes you look at yourself rather than what you may get out of it or get out of consuming content in the future. But
yeah, that's exactly it, man. To add to that, I mean, my whole thing is like, podcasts are so interesting, right? Because it's inherently a passive thing. Like, you listen to a podcast while you're doing something else. It's like something like that. But I really try to create active experiences for listeners, to your point, they integrate something and they do that. People ask me all the time, they're like, Case, like, why haven't you written a book? Like, why don't you have a publisher and you write a 400-page book? Why haven't you done that? And instead you write journals? Like the things that I sell are journals, right? It's half book, half journal. And I'm like, that's because I want people to lean into what they're doing and what they're consuming, not just sit back, read it, be like, oh, it's an interesting thought, I'll call it a day. And it's the same thought process to the podcast, right? I want people to lean forward and be fully engaged with the content, not just as something to fill their day. A lot of people say like the meditations that I do that. Like, I set it to music. It's not just a passive thing. Like, you're active, you're involved with it. It becomes like part of your ethos and like your whole like kinetic action. It's like, so I'm really big on that idea. Like, for podcasting doesn't have to be this lean back activity where people just consume it and call it a day. Like, they could be very engaged with it. They can listen to it and be texting me at the same time. They can listen to it and be writing the notes that I encourage people to do. So all these different things. So I just glad you brought that up. I'm very, very gung ho about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think I agree with too your decision framework about writing a book versus the journal. I think an example that came to mind immediately when you brought that up was David Goggins. His whole book is about his incredible story, doing all these amazing things and overcoming adversity. But it says at the beginning of the chapter, like, I'm not the superhero of the story, you are. But still, my takeaway is that David Goggins is the superhero. Yeah. And so if you don't make that option, right, like, you don't tell your incredible story, you're just like, these are good questions you should ask yourself. People aren't as likely to end up framing you as the superhero, which is, again, not the point at all of what we're doing. Right. But I do want to pass it over to Kyle for question 4.
Absolutely. One of my favorite questions. It is, if you could start your show over again, what would you do differently to have grown it more effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. I was thinking about that earlier. I think if I had, I don't know, it's an interesting question. I think what I've circled is early on, I produced a lot of content very quickly. There was even a point where I was releasing 3 podcasts a week. And in retrospect, I don't think that was the right idea. Because obviously, as a podcaster, on the day where you get downloads or on the days when you release episodes, and then from there, it basically goes way down, right? And especially when you're cranking out content, it'll go like this, and then on that particular episode, right? And then it'll be like this every single day you do a podcast episode. I think in retrospect, if I could do it over again, I would have done what I did, which is launched with 2 episodes live to give people a bank of content. And then from there, I would have done 1 episode a week for the first like 2 months. And I would have focused every piece of energy I had on the content of those episodes, and then the distribution and traffic driving to those episodes, as opposed to being very tied to the superficial metrics of every new episode, because I want to get people in to really understand what I have to offer rather than hitting them with volume. So if I could do it again, I probably would have focused on fewer, more premium episodes, and just focused on distributing those episodes as opposed to just like cranking out content. I think that might have helped a little. I mean, I had a great launch in the early days. I had a big email list, and when I launched it, it really took off, and I'm super grateful for that. But I think, I mean, I'm almost at a point now, I still do 2 episodes a week. And then the coming year, I'm going to scale back and do 1 a week, for a variety of reasons. But I think you can really focus on really, really great content, and then put everything you have behind distributing that content for a week, and then move on to the next episode, as opposed to, content distro, like it becomes this cycle where you're not as effective. So if I go back, less content, more premium, more focus on distributing that initially.
Well, that's a great answer. Thank you for sharing that. Last question we have in the summit. I think this will be an interesting answer, because from what it sounds like, you've been a very successful organic growth story. But if you had $1,000 to spend to grow your audience and to market your show, how would you spend the money?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would love to hear what other successful podcasters have to say, because I haven't found a successful paid marketing strategy for podcasting. I would say, though, if I were to put that money to use, I would probably do something. $1,000 won't get you very far, but I would say sponsoring a popular email newsletter that's really aligned, it's going to take you really far. Early on, I was close with the founders of Morning Brew, and I sponsored it. This is when they were under 1 million subscribers, but they were still doing really, really well. And that took me to another level. So that was really effective versus like, promoting a post on Instagram or something like that. I've never found that to be effective. So I would say that, or I would say some kind of very aligned giveaway. Not like a cheesy celebrity giveaway where it's like, follow these 50 accounts, like nothing like that. It would have to be a very aligned, I'm giving this thing away, and it's very aligned with my brand. And what you have to do is you have to subscribe, screenshot, rate and review, something like that serves a purpose. I think that's effective. But the incentive has to be aligned with the show. It can't be, I'm just giving away a car, I'm giving away a mattress. It has to be something that makes sense for the audience, where the reason that they want the product is the same reason why they would probably listen to your show. So say between there, that would be my answer. But I'd be very interested to hear what other people say, because I've been fortunate where it's been all organic. And then the paid marketing that I put towards my brand is towards my e-commerce ventures, which then comes back to the podcast. But I'd say those two.
Well, I'm glad that you're interested to hear the answers of other podcasters, because we are going to be releasing all of these summits live onto YouTube for free for anybody that wants to check it out and see the answers from all of the different podcasters that we are interviewing. But if people really enjoyed your answers, Case, where should we send them to find you, to find your podcast, to support the show?
Yeah, just Instagram's easiest, case.kenny on Instagram, or newmindsetwhodis.com. Between those, you'll find me.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, guys. This is great.
Thank you so much for watching this interview. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please subscribe to our channel right here on YouTube. And if you feel like you learned something, share this episode on social media to help us grow our audience as well.